The title of the class is, as you can see, is Tragedy and Transformation, Heeding the Call of Tish'a BeAb. And it's in memory of Jack Levy, who I am going to talk about a little bit today. I'll start by saying that this, I think for everybody that I know, this past year and a half has been very, very challenging and difficult and tragic. A lot of very sad things have happened, beginning first and foremost, of course, with the fact that the entire world was struck with a pandemic. And then we lost some very precious people. We lost matriarchs and patriarchs. The most fragile people among us were affected the most, people that we depend on and that we need in our lives. And in the midst of all that, I'm thinking back to last summer and last Tish'a BeAb, even in the midst of all of our struggling to figure out what was going on in this world, as a community, as a country, we became very deeply divided. There was a lot of anger. There were people rioting in the streets, people, feeling a lot of negativity. And throughout all of this, and it has been building, I would say, it's been building for years, but certainly building more and more for the Jewish people, a feeling of rising anti-Semitism. That everywhere we look, it seems that when things are getting difficult in the world, we definitely, it's not a fake thing that there's a scapegoating that goes on around the Jewish people, which is very disturbing. And then, as a high school principal, I'll say, I had to stand on the front lines with a lot of other adults, teachers and nurses and doctors, and go to work every day. But the experience of going to work every day was an experience of confronting young adults who really, really, what we found out, need one another, depend on each other. And it's not, we know it's not just young adults, but that and I think we always knew it, that so much of a part of being a high school student is being surrounded by friends and being surrounded by a social circle. And when that was ripped away from our teenagers, looking around the room, I see that we have therapists from the school here, a fellow principal from the school is here, that will vouch for this, that the number of children that we saw suffering with mental illness, with sadness, with anxiety, skyrocketed over the past year. It was very, very hard to bear witness to that and to see them struggling, and not really as adults, we want to fix things. That's our job. We want to make things better. And we felt very powerless in the face of that. And then, of course, communal tragedies like Meron, which was so horrifying, the loss of life on a happy day. Recently, we had Miami, a building in the middle of the night to collapse. These are things we don't, we haven't done 9/11, but we don't have experience with these things. And then our Flatbush community, the high school, we lost one of our children. We lost one of our students. Of course, it was the day after, really, just a few hours after graduation, when we were all celebrating together and very happy. And then we lost one of our students, Jack Levy. I was texting his mother on Friday just to say Shabbat Shalom, and I'm thinking about you. I mentioned I was giving a class. I said, would you like it to be in his memory? She said, could you please make sure to make it in his memory and to talk a little bit about Jack. And I think she's zooming in with us right now. And we're together with her in that suffering as well, today as a Jewish people. And that's, all of that, I would say, is culminating in a very, very sad moment for the Jewish people, certainly, but for all of us when we think about these things. I'm going to be signaling to Emily when I want her to switch a slide. And then I do think that I do love being Jewish, I really do, because I think it's amazing that this is what the first line of what we have to read as Jews on this day, right? Very famously, we read Echa because we can't learn a lot of things. Echa yashva badad ha'ira bati'am. How could it be, right? This is the language of Echa. Echa, like how could it be that a city that was once so full of life and so happy and so, it was the best city in all the world that is suddenly all alone. Right? This city that was the most beloved, everybody used to, it's the passageway. Now it's like a widow. She was a princess amongst the nations, now she's become a tributary. I feel always, in the face of tragedy and sadness, Echa is always my number one question. It's the disparity, it's the dissonance of yesterday. It feels like just yesterday everything was fine. Everything was normal. Not only normal, it was wonderful. We were happy, we were celebrating, we were together, we were unified. And now we look and where are we? Why is this happening? Why are we in a state of tragedy right now? And that's the voice of Echa, it's the voice of the prophet who has lived through the moments of Jerusalem's glory and now sees its destruction. But it's the voice of anyone who has suffered tragedy or loss, which is what is this? How could this be? And I think it's a combination, it's a very angry cry, it's very sorrowful, it's very reflective. But the Jewish people, I think what's very important is that we're not going to shy away from this feeling and almost lean into it. We have to always think about Tehillim. There's very famous Tehillim. I do think if you want to, I was thinking, you can't read all of Echa out loud and say that was a class, although that's really what it should be. But let's read, I think, what the voice of Echa is, which is in this Mizmor. Al Naharot Babel. And Emily, you can go to the next slide. Al Naharot Babel, Sham Yashavnu, Gam Bachinu B'Zachrenu et Zion. All right, we're at the rivers of Babylon, and we're crying because we're remembering Sion. We had to hang up our lyres on the poplars there, because that's where our captors said, sing for us. And these oppressors, and this is really quite horrifying, that the people who took us into captivity, burned the temple, razed the city to the ground, say, sing us one of your famous songs. Sing us one of the songs of Sion. And this, to me, if you're wondering, what does Echa mean? What is Tish'a BeAb about? It's this question of, how are we supposed to sing ever again? How are we supposed to ever experience happiness or joy? How are we supposed to go on with the process of living? Al admat nechad. Here, on the literal level, it means on alien soil, on land that is not ours. But of course, it also means, how are we supposed to ever be happy again in this strange and alien world? It's a world that doesn't make sense anymore, and a world that's taken us away from normalcy, where loss is always front and center. How are we supposed to experience joy? I think the next line is the answer. Im eshkachech Yerushalayim tishkach yemini. Titbak l'shoni l'chiki im lo eskerechi im lo aleh et Yerushalayim al rosh simchati. We all know it because we say it at every wedding. And then we realize, oh, this is the response. How do you cope with this loss? The Jewish response is, you don't forget it. It's not about repressing it. It's not about saying, forget that, next. It's about the fact that we as a people refuse to only be in a celebratory mood. Even in our happiest occasions, we're going to recall the fact that we're not home, that we're not shalem, that we're not complete, that there has been loss, that there has been tragedy. That's who we are as a people. We do the reverse as well. We're going to do it by the end of this class, that in the deepest sorrow, we are always going to remember that we are not alone, that there is hope, that there is happiness. We do both. Today is the day that we don't just remember the destruction, we inhabit it. We're not, we say, why don't we eat and drink? The answer is, when you're depressed and sorrowful and in mourning, you can't eat or drink. You cannot. People give you food and it tastes like dust. That's the feeling. You have no sense of it. You don't need to be told to sit on the floor. That is where you go. Comfort feels wrong. So we are inhabiting that, not to make ourselves feel tortured. We're inhabiting it because we want to enter into a mindset of mourning. This is the voice of Echad. This is the voice of our prophets who say, there is no version of the Jewish people forgetting this, right? Zechor Adonai Levnei Edom Yom Yerushalayim Ha'omim Ahadu Ahadu Ara Yisod Ba. We always have to remember Yom Yerushalayim as the day that they say, raise it to its foundations, where they utterly destroyed us. They ripped everything away from us. Our identity was negated. And I just want you to know, what we know 2,000 years later is that we fought back against that negation, against that desire to empty us out of all identity. And the way we fought back is through mourning. We mourned and then moved on, but we mourned. We said, this is our land, this is our nation. We never let go of the hope for Israel. I want to read you, on the next slide, a poem by Primo Levi, of course, a Holocaust survivor. He wrote this poem exactly 1 month after he was liberated from Auschwitz. For me, when I was reading it in preparation, I heard Im Eshkachech, and I heard Echa. I heard the voice of the separation of 2,000 years, this voice of destruction, and this call. Let's read it together. You who live secure in your warm houses, who return at evening to find hot food and friendly faces, consider whether this is a man who labors in the mud, who knows no peace, who fights for a crust of bread, who dies at a yes or a no. Consider whether this is a woman without hair or name, with no more strength to remember, eyes empty and womb cold as a frog in winter. Consider that this has been. I commend these words to you. Engrave them on your hearts when you are in your house, when you walk on your way, when you go to bed, when you rise. Repeat them to your children, or may your house crumble. Disease render you powerless. Your offspring avert their faces from you. If you're listening to the poem, of course, the title immediately makes sense. The title of the poem is Shema. And you hear that he is taking the language of Shema, right? And he's transforming it into a poem about the Holocaust, where he is talking about this idea of when you are in your comfortable state, when you are in your marriage ceremony, in your happiness, in your warmth, and in your security, do you recall? Can you, Im Eshkachech, are you going to forget? Im Eshkachech was written 2,000 years before the words never forget, right? Never forget is the call of the Jewish people for thousands of years. It saves us. Because Primo Levi says, if you do forget, this, right, this is Shema. Shema says you must engrave this on your heart, or else. We don't say that part, we whisper it in shul. Your houses will crumble, right? Disease render you powerless. Offspring avert their faces from you. The idea that if you live in a society that doesn't recall the Holocaust with horror and spend time talking about it, not averting your face from it, spending time thinking about it together as a community, that tragedy follows from that. We know why tragedy follows from it. I had a long conversation with my fellow administrators. We were talking about what it means, like what's our mission with our students. We were talking about action and thoughts and feelings. And we're going back and forth a lot. I'm going to tell you what the argument was. It was this idea of we want to create a generation of young people who do good in this world, who make this world a better place, right? We would all agree with that. We want to interact with human beings who feel obligated to the good, who feel obligated to the mission of the Jewish people. So what we were discussing, though, is how do you create a sense of obligation? Is it simply, and I would say yes to this because it's part of it, that they have to feel commanded to do good? They must feel that tzedek and mishpat is a way of life and that is a necessity. But something we were also talking about is how do you create sensitivity in the soul of a human being? So that it's not just that they're going to a soup kitchen and doing good, which we want them to do. I want you to understand this. They have to. Like, I'd rather that they just go to the soup kitchen rather than having all sorts of feelings about being there, right? Because the feelings are hard to create, but the actions I can demand. However, if you really want to create a generation of thoughtful, sensitive people, don't they have to understand why they're there? Do you hear my question? Don't they have to feel connected to the activity of doing good? And when you live a life that is only about security and comfort, and there's always a meal on your table, and you're always feeling happy, do you have the consciousness and the sensitivity to do the good in the world that you need to do? I don't know. I'm talking to you guys. I'm willing to listen. Think about it in your minds for a minute. Does the Jewish experience of sorrow, does our constant remembrance of pain impel us to chesed, tzedakah, and mishpat? I think yes. I think the reason we have Tish'a BeAb right now is because if you don't have Tish'a BeAb, Yom Kippur is meaningless. If you don't start weeks ahead thinking about, wow, tragedy is in this world, sorrow is everywhere around me, am I going to do anything about it? Do I feel the need to stop this? To make this world less difficult, to ease pain and sorrow in the people around me? How do you build sensitive souls? How do you do it? I think there's many answers. I think it's by reading Ezra. I think it's by teaching about the Holocaust. I think it's by reading great literature. I think it's by being attuned to other human beings, looking people in the eye, listening to what they have to say. Primo Levi is very scared that we're not going to do that. Another voice, right? The next slide. Elie Wiesel, my niece Jacqueline was telling me, she's like, you always quote Elie Wiesel. I'm like, why wouldn't I quote Elie Wiesel? He's a great voice. Elie Wiesel, this is his thoughts. Never shall I forget. It's the same. Do you hear the resonance in all the pieces we're reading? Never shall I forget that night, the first night in camp, that turned my life into one long night, 7 times sealed. Never shall I forget that smoke. Never shall I forget the small faces of the children, whose bodies I saw transformed into smoke under a silent sky. The writers of the Holocaust always point out the loss of innocent lives, the loss of children. Primo Levi spoke about your children. Elie Wiesel is going to talk about the children. I cut and pasted. Eicha will talk about the children. Did you read Eicha last night with the Hebrew and the English combined? Did you hear how passionate Eicha was about reminding you that little children were suffering unnecessarily? Elie Wiesel, you see that second piece? I cut it because it was too painful. I couldn't actually read it out loud. There are parts of Eicha that I refuse to read out loud. It's too graphic and too sad and scary, even though I know that today is the day that I'm supposed to do it. Elie Wiesel tells a story about how, as he is marching, he's passing people hanging, being hanged. And one of them is a child. And the child is not dying because he didn't weigh enough. And he hears a man behind him saying, "For God's sake, where is God?" And he says, "From within me I heard a voice answer, where he is, this is where, hanging here from this gallows." And about a few minutes, at 1:15, my husband is giving a class on this topic of Imo Anochi B'Tzada. There are two ways that people think about God and tragedy. One way that they think about it is that God has brought tragedy upon us and into my life, that he is punishing me. The other way of thinking about it, that, and there's a lot to talk about that being a Lurianic, mystical, Kabbalistic view, and that Maimonides and the rationalists say, there's very clear words in the Torah that say that God created this world and he created free will. And he created human beings with the ability to choose good and choose evil. And when evil is chosen, God suffers along with every human being. That is him suffering. They killed God's mission and passion. They were destroyers of the covenant. Destroyers of everything that God stands for. That's what the definition of evil is. That's not God. That's not HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's not the divine. The divine recoils in horror at the abuse of innocence. That is terrifying. That is Elie Wiesel's response, who suffered through this and really tragically tried to think through that how could this be, right? And his response is, no, this too is Imo Anochi B'Tzada. I suffer when you suffer. And God does not desire suffering. He doesn't want us to sit here and suffer today. He doesn't no joy in suffering. We're supposed to eliminate suffering. But how could you eliminate suffering if you don't understand it? How could you eliminate something that you're not tuned into, that you don't know what's happening in this world? It's too hard to look at every day. It's just today that we're going to look at it. It's just today that we're going to talk about it. It's not on the slide, but this is the voice of Eicha last night. I have to read it to you because it's very powerful. Let me see if I have it. 1 second. This is the voice. This is what the Mizmor is responding to. That the children were starving in Yerushalayim, in Sion. Dabak lishon yelnek el chiko. They were starving so much that their tongue stuck to the roof of their mouth. Right? Tidbak lishon yelecheki is a repetition of what happened to them. Which means, if I forget Jerusalem, I am going to suffer the way they suffered again. Because I won't bring joy to this world. I won't eliminate suffering from this world, right? We can't allow that. We can't allow the Olalim to ask for lechem, the young children to be asking for bread and water on the streets, right? We must work against that. So here's where I go with all of this. I always think, and it's part of what part of the answer we just started to give. On the next slide. What is that I have to ask on Tish'a BeAb? I must ask. So then what is the root of evil? What is it that God does not want? What is it that we have to work against? If I'm sitting on the floor and in mourning today, what do I have to be focusing on? I want to read the second quote first. Elie Wiesel again. You see it? We must not see any person as an abstraction. Instead, we must see in every person a universe with its own secrets, with its own treasures, with its own sources of anguish, and with some measure of triumph. For Elie Wiesel, the most dangerous thing that the Nazis did, which we know, is that they eliminated humanity from the Jewish people. They erased us. Literally, they took away our names, they gave us numbers, shaved their heads, starved them, they treated them like animals, but of course worse than animals. Why? Because it's very easy to be cruel to an abstraction. It's very easy to hurt and torture and kill something that you don't see as a valid human life. So what's the opposite of that? This is Rabbi Labaton. We think about him today a lot. The opposite of that is Tzelem Elokim. Do you not know that every human being is created in the image of God? Do you not know that they're sacred and you cannot hurt them with impunity? Is that something that we have to say all the time? Yes! Obviously, this is the world we live in. I want to talk about what I've noticed the last couple of months. I know it's been going on forever. Somebody called it a social media pogrom. You know what? Social media pogrom. We've gone through many pogroms, now we're going through a new one. Online, everyone is an abstraction. If you're on Instagram, people are commenting and saying, if only Hitler had done a better job. And they are saying that. And then they're saying it in more secretive ways, like, oh, Israel is a genocidal country that kills babies. They take the words of our mourning and transform us into the aggressors. We become the Babylonians in this story. They make us the evil ones. They are dehumanizing us. That's what they're doing. They're turning the Jewish people into evil incarnate and dehumanizing us. And it's happening all over the world. And the reason that they can do it is because they don't have to look at us. Because they can stay anonymous online. They're literal bots. We know that the Iranians and the Chinese have literally programmed robots, machines, to write anti-Semitic comments into the world, put it into the ether. That's the opposite of everything that the Torah teaches. The opposite of thinking about human beings and how difficult it is to be human, how nuanced it is, right? That we're all flawed and we do good and we do bad. To dehumanize us is to call us genocidal, apartheid state Jews. Happening today. If you are not angry, and I know everybody's sitting here is because I've spoken to you about it at parties. We're all angry. But our anger needs to go in a direction, right? We need to think about it. And I will recall that the rabbis say, you know what the root of all this is? Kamsa bar kamsa. The story about a dinner party, I teach it every year because I think it's interesting that the rabbis could reduce the destruction of the temple to a dinner party gone wrong. They sent the wrong invitation. And then the guy shows up, he's like, we're not friends with you, leave. An abstraction. They took a human being and they made him into an abstraction. It's like, you're not my friend, leave my party. And the whole temple was destroyed. But I like the quote before it that I always like to say, Ashrei adam mefached tamid umekasher libo yipol b'ra'ah. It's very good to always have a little bit of fear in your heart, a little bit of the horror, a little bit of the memory. But the point of Tish'a BeAb is not to create stubbornness. It's not to put you into the sand and make you a bitter, angry, and then creating abstractions of other people's from your anger and your sorrow and your horror. That's not it. It's that we're sensitive. We're sensitive. And we're going to stay sensitive, okay? The IDF is going to stay sensitive in the face of all of these criticisms. That's what makes them powerful. That's what makes us powerful. Does that make sense? Are you with me? Is everybody still awake? The lights are off. Don't fall asleep. I'm still teaching. I have only 5 minutes left. No, I have 10 whole minutes, okay? Hannah Arendt says it, I think, very beautifully. The greatest evil perpetrated is the evil committed by nobodies. That is, by human beings who refuse to be persons. Isn't that amazing? You know who she wrote that about? Eichmann. She sat at his trial, she looked at him, and she said, this man is a nobody. He has no identity. He's not a person. He's erased himself. He has no sensitivity left. He doesn't see other human beings as human. He's not even human. He's become a machine. He's allowed himself to so abstract from reality. She was like, you can't talk to him. I wrote an essay, and I think I mentioned this in previous Tish'a BeAb, that I once wrote an essay in 7th grade. They said, what's your greatest fear? And I think I wrote an empty container. But I was being serious. My greatest fear, an empty container, what is it? It's just there's nothing there. I'm afraid of bugs. You know why I'm afraid of bugs? You can't talk to them. They have no consciousness. They're just going to sting you. They're horrible. My greatest fear is a human being that acts like that. Where is your sensitivity? Where's your consciousness? Where's your soul? Where's your humanity? Yeah? Yes. Have you felt that? Have you ever interacted with that? That you're talking to someone and you feel like they can't even see you or hear you or understand you because they have such a wall up to your humanity? It's terrifying. It's terrifying. This is not on my slide. I'm going to read for a minute. Oh, maybe it is on my slide. This is my answer to it, huh? Let's look at the next one. This is Viktor Frankl, also a Holocaust survivor. Yes, I quoted a bunch of them. I have learned 2 lessons in my life. First, there are no sufficient literary, psychological, or historical answers to human tragedy. There's no answers. Why do bad things happen? What is this about? There's no real answers. The only answer, the only moral ones. Our only response could be a moral response. Second, just as despair can come to one another only from another human being, hope too can only be given to one only by other human beings. Right? Immersing yourself today in your sorrow is a way of immersing yourself in your humanity. And the deeper and more human you become, the better you will be at extending humanity and kindness to other people. Every Holocaust survivor understood this and wanted to give you this message. All 3, that's why I quoted so many of them, because I wanted you to see how from Echa to Tehillim, to Primo Levi, to Viktor Frankl, to Elie Wiesel, they're all saying the exact same thing. They all witnessed horror and said, where is your humanity? How will you become a better human being? I want to talk just for a minute about Jack Levy. This is a quote that was his yearbook quote, smile and the world will smile back. Jack was a real human being. A true human being. Every person who's remembering him and talking to him, they talk about the fact that he wasn't the most popular or well-known kid in the school, but he was the kindest. If he saw somebody sitting alone, he would go over and sit next to them and smile at them. If he saw somebody that was lonely, he would try to help with their loneliness. Am I saying the truth? Yeah. He saw people, each person, as unique individuals. He didn't try to sum everybody up. He refused to categorize them. He hated labels. He hated them. He refused to be labeled himself, and he refused to label others. There was no such thing as, oh, those are the popular kids, oh, those are the Milesian kids, oh, those are the kids from San. Nothing. Everybody was a person. And because of that, he tried very, very hard to engage authentically with all human beings. And you know what he brought out of people? Their humanity. Because he looked them in the eye, and he smiled at them, and he said, I see you. I'm willing to see you, not an abstraction of you. And he changed the world for the better. And it's not fair that we lost him. It's not. It's an unmitigated tragedy. There's no thinking about this without saying, this is terrible and horrifying. That's all. It shouldn't have been. But what do? The only thing that the Jewish people know how to do, which is we are going to talk about him a lot. And the reason we're going to talk about him is because he set a good example, and we want to continue to perpetuate that. And that's what we do with loss. I want to read you quickly a little letter that came out right before Shabbat. I got this letter from the school. It says, as the days turn into weeks and weeks turn into months since we lost our dear friend Jack Charles Levy, alav shalom, life pushes us to return to normal. But we can't. We can't move on. We don't want to move on. We don't want Jack to be someone who we merely look back on, but rather someone with us day in and day out, someone who we will continue to have a lasting impact on us, someone who we will feel next to us during our highest and our lowest moments. This was written by students. Do you see the identical language? אם אשכחך בירושלים תשכח ימיני תדבק לשוני לחיקי אם לא אזכרך אם לא אעלה את ירושלים על ראש שמחתי. They say no. Our response, we're not going to forget Jack. We want him sitting next to us all the time because he is important to remember. Not so that we feel sad all the time, so that we become better people all the time. This is important. I want to read you one last thing. This is from Rabbi Sachs, who we also lost recently. He's talking about how do we respond to the craziness of the world we're living in today, okay? We're living in such a crazy world. We really are. We're living in an inflection moment. We have to do a lot of talking and learning together. I have 3 minutes. I'm going to read this. So in a world like today, this is Rabbi Sachs, religion can do one of 3 things. Number 1, it can attempt to conquer society. That is the radical Islamist version. He says, you know, one thing, what does religion do when things get crazy? One thing is you could become a crazy Islamist and say everybody has to be part of Islam and I'm going to kill you if you're not. Number 2, it can withdraw from society. That is the Benedictine option or the ultra-Orthodox option, right? You could say, well, this world is too dangerous. There's too many crazies out there. There's too many, look at this, there's paganism everywhere. We live in a world of paganism. Let's go into a sealed city, like an underground bunker, and survive, right? Or number 3, it can attempt to re-inspire society, to do what we must do, which is to give people a new form of hope, new courage to human effort. If we adopt the first option, we will move straight away into the dark ages. If we adopt the second, we will survive, but the world around us will remain dark. If we adopt the third option of being true to ourselves and yet still engaged in the public square, we have a chance of avoiding the dark and of countering cultural climate change, right? He ends by saying, religion is that which seeks to consecrate this world, to create community and reweave the torn fabric of society. It doesn't seek power, it seeks influence. It's engaged with the world. It's not in retreat from the world. That is the kind of religion that the world needs now. It's very insignificant, this last piece. We have choices to be made. We need to stay connected to the Jewish mission, which is that we are a very inspired and inspiring people, influential in many different ways. To retreat is an option, but it's self-serving. We need to figure out how to engage properly, how to bring the best to humanity, and to do that with courage. Can we go to the very last slide, Emily? My dad wrote a book recently. We had a launch party for it on Wednesday night. He's sitting here. I meant to hold it up. And it's a book about Yirmiyahu. This is a quote from Yirmiyahu that we just read during the 3 weeks. And the title of the book is Livnot V'Lin Torah, to build and to plant. Hashem comes to Yirmiyah and he says, I need you to be a prophet. I need you to go out in the world and make it better. I need you to talk to people. And Miriam says, I have nothing to, I'm just a knot, I have no words. God says, what do you mean you have no words? You have me. You have my voice. You have the Torah. You have the prophetic message. You have a lot of words to say. Yes, there is destruction, and there's sorrow, and there's tragedy, but your job is also going to be livnot v'lentoa, to build and to plant. And he ends by saying this, V'ani hine netaticha hayom le'ir mivsar, v'la'amud barzel, u'lechamot nechoshet al kol ha'aretz. I am going to make you today a fortified city, an iron pillar with brazen walls against everyone, against all your enemies, right? They will fight you, but they will not win. Because I am with you. I want this to be the last thing to take away from this class. That's the last words. You have to feel that your own self, your good humanity, your ability to see others and to be kind, take that to the world with a sense of force of iron inside of you, with strength. Don't be scared. Don't be scared of evil and tragedy. Don't let it win. Be very strong. Go away from Tish'a BeAb with great strength. We are the Jewish people. We are unbelievable. We have the prophetic message in our hearts, engraved there from generation to generation. We will always remember Israel. We will always rebuild. We will always stand up to evil. We will survive. It will take great strength. I invite you to join me in being the voice of strength in this world. Tenachem min hashamayim, we should know your secret things.